Hello my friends, and welcome back to a super exciting Baldur's Gate 3 video, one that I honestly never thought I would be able to do. We're getting a massive new patch for Baldur's Gate 3, including a ton of new features, spells, animations, and most importantly, 12 new subclasses that will be officially supported. Obviously, this is a tremendous addition to the game. We haven't had any new subclasses added since the game was launched, and so that's really awesome that they're continuing to add content, in addition to supporting all of the amazing mods and everything that everyone has done. I honestly did not think that we would see another major content patch for Baldur's Gate 3, probably just bug fixes and tweaks, so this is a real gift, and I'm honestly very excited to see all of these new subclasses and check them out. I'll go through all of the things that they've announced in this announcement and all of the changes that we can expect. And then also I want to talk about each of the subclasses and what they do in tabletop, because these are all tabletop characters that are being moved to Baldur's Gate 3, so that you can get some idea of what we're looking forward to when these subclasses actually launch. And I'll talk as well about just sort of how powerful they are, in my opinion, and what types of builds we're going to start making with them when these subclasses are available. Alright, let's take a look. So first off, let's take a quick look at the highlights. Console crossplay obviously is an amazing feature, letting you play games with your friends who are on different systems. That's going to be really important to a lot of people. Secondly, photo mode is very cool. Obviously, this is a beautiful game. That's one of the things that really draws people to it, and so being able to create photos in photo mode is going to be awesome, and I'm sure we will all use it responsibly and only in the most family-friendly ways. But of course, for me, as someone who really loves character building, the big thing here is going to be the 12 subclasses. But I also want to quickly talk about this one line. While we'll be wrapping up our feature-heavy updates for Baldur's Gate 3 soon, this is not yet the end for our mod tools. So firstly, that means continuing mod support, which is great. But secondly, this line does leave the door open for another feature-heavy update. So patch 8 may not actually be the last major patch in Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously, no guarantees, of course, but they are at least leaving the door open and have not said this is absolutely going to be our last patch, which is pretty cool and gives me hope that we might see even more cool features coming later on. This game has had a tremendous amount of post-launch support, way more, honestly, than they needed to do, and has really been turned into a game that I think will stand the test of time, and the fact that they're continuing to update it is really incredible. Honestly, I just want to shout out Larian for being an incredible developer and giving us such a wonderful game, and then continuing to work on it. One of the ways that they are doing that, of course, is with console crossplay, which is a feature that a lot of games don't have, and really helps bring Baldur's Gate, I think. A lot of games, I think, if you're playing them on console, you're sort of playing the game as like a second-class citizen. You probably have menus that are designed more for using on console than on PC, because most menus in AAA games now are designed console first, much to my chagrin. But you probably don't get a lot of features like online play is often disabled on console, mods are often disabled on console, and Larian has really, in my opinion, put a ton of effort into making the game equal on console as on PC. And I think that's incredible because it just makes the game available to the widest number of people. I sound a little bit like I'm just cheerleading Larian here, but you know, it can't all be criticizing their bad tooltips. They do a lot of things that are really incredible. And that, I think, is one of them, and something that more game developers should really take a lesson from because of how good it has been for the game and how much it has grown the community. Next up, of course, the game is on sale, 20% off, which is worth noting if you don't happen to own it yet, and are watching this video just to, you know, if you've been waiting to pull the trigger for a sale. 20% sale. I might wait for December because I expect there will be a deeper sale. I have no inside information about this, of course, but my expectation would be that the game will go on a slightly deeper sale around Christmas or New Year's. So if you are waiting to pull the trigger to buy it until there's a deeper sale, that might be a good idea. But you know, that's just my take, not something that I have any information about. But of course, what we're really excited for here, because this is a builds channel primarily, is the new subclasses. So we're getting 12 new subclasses, one for each class, which is a massive increase to the available build variety even before you dip into mods, which, as they've mentioned, are going to be officially supported going forward, so we'll have tons more modded subclasses. There's currently, I think, 46 subclasses in the game, so adding 12 is a more than 25% increase in the number of subclasses available, which tremendously increases the number of different builds that we can make and different strategies that we can employ. They've also chosen a lot of subclasses that have new and unique takes on that class, which I think is going to make for really interesting builds and characters once we start to use them. They also mention here that the subclasses have new unique abilities, new animations, a ton of new cantrips and summons, and probably a couple more spells. And they mention a few of the homebrewed actions and stuff like that that the subclasses are getting. So this is not just tacked on subclasses. It actually contains a lot of custom content. We'll see, of course, when they actually release it, how much content it actually is. But at least from the announcement, this looks like they are going to be pretty well developed and deep additions to the game that will dramatically improve the number of builds we have available. First up, Bard is getting the College of Glamour. This is a subclass from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Now, unfortunately, for copyright reasons, I can't show you the entry from the tabletop book, so I will describe what this class does in tabletop, in addition to what is listed here, and talk about how this class will be used and sort of how powerful it's going to be. College of Glamour is a control-focused bard. People were actually quite surprised that Swords Bard made it in over Glamour Bard. Lore and Valor Bards are sort of the two default bards from the original Player's Handbook. And people were expecting Glamour to be the third Bard subclass that made it in, because it does something different than the other two. If Lore is focused on skills and spellcasting, and Valor is focused on melee combat, then College of Glamour is focused on control. It does this using Command, which obviously is going to be awesome in Baldur's Gate 3 because Command is ludicrously powerful, especially as compared to the tabletop version of the spell. College of Glamour gets a few things. Firstly, you can give allies temporary hit points, and then when those allies are attacked, the enemy attacking them has to make a saving throw or become charmed. I think Charm is a pretty underused effect in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, it's not very strong as implemented in the game, but it still gives you a reasonable debuff for a group of enemies, and of course adding temp HP to your allies is pretty powerful. The real feature of this, though, is that charmed enemies become vulnerable to your other abilities. At level 6, you get a ludicrously powerful effect that lets you, once per long rest, activate Command as a bonus action without costing a spell slot once per turn for 10 turns, and enemies who are charmed by you automatically fail the saving throw. Now, in Baldur's Gate, this ability has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 of the most powerful phrases in the entirety of Baldur's Gate 3. Firstly, Command. Secondly, as a bonus action. Thirdly, without costing a spell slot. And fourthly, automatically fail their saving throw. Command is a ridiculously powerful effect that instantly wins combats, and so being able to spam it out once per turn for 10 turns as a bonus action is ludicrous. Obviously, entire builds in Baldur's Gate 3 optimization are built around the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, which you don't get until Act 3, and lets you cast Command as a bonus action after making a melee attack. College of Glamour bards just get this as a default character action that they can use all the time. So I expect them to be an extremely strong addition to any party if that ability makes it into Baldur's Gate 3 unchanged. Commanding enemies to drop to the ground or even command disarm can be extremely useful as well. And if enemies automatically fail their saving throw, if they're charmed, then that obviously instantly wins tons and tons of encounters because automatically failing saving throws is so powerful. So I expect College of Glamour Bard to be instantly a top tier character if they don't make significant changes to that ability. The other ability that you get at level 3 is a sort of flavor or role-playing thing. You can charm enemies by doing a performance. If you spend 1 minute doing a performance, then enemies become charmed. So they're going to have to house rule something for the level 3 ability for this class, because in Baldur's Gate 3, you can't spend 1 minute playing the violin to enemies. That's just not something that this game really supports you doing. So I expect to see a house ruled ability for whatever their level 3 ability is. But College of Glamour Bard, I'm really glad to see a more control-focused Bard in the game that doesn't involve an item combo. I expect they will have to change this character's abilities a little bit because they're so powerful in Baldur's Gate 3, but I expect it nevertheless to be a top-tier character almost immediately. Barbarian is getting Path of the Giants as a subclass, which is a subclass based around throwing, and particularly around throwing characters. This is honestly a pretty interesting one for them to have included, because a lot of the things that the tabletop version of this subclass gives you are already baked into the core mechanics of Baldur's Gate 3. You get a lot of abilities based around picking up and throwing creatures, allies and enemies alike, and that's already something that any character with sufficient strength can just do in Baldur's Gate. So they are probably going to have to house rule Path of the Giants significantly in order to give it relevant abilities in Baldur's Gate. It's also, in my opinion, a slightly odd inclusion to have another throwing-focused subclass, because in Baldur's Gate 3, the Berserker Barbarian already fills that role in a lot of cases, but this character is going to be, I think, more focused around throwing creatures rather than throwing weapons as a bonus action, the way Berserker Barbarian often ends up being. However, there's one really, really cool feature that's not mentioned here that I do want to mention, which is at level 6, the Path of the Giant Barbarian gets the ability to turn any weapon into a thrown weapon. Now, in Baldur's Gate 3, there's no way to turn weapons into thrown weapons except for the, if you get lucky on your Wild Heart Barbarian, on your Wild Magic Barbarian, Wild Magic Surge. But the Path of the Giants Barbarian is going to let you turn any weapon into a weapon with the thrown weapon property, which is going to vastly increase the number of different pieces of equipment that throwing characters can use. That's already one of the most powerful strategies in Baldur's Gate 3, so a character that can use different kinds of equipment as thrown weapons will be even more interesting, and I expect to see a lot of weird bugs and interesting damage numbers showing up as a result when you start throwing things like Falar or the Rat Bat or whatever that have damage rider glitches. I'll be very interested to see how that works if that ability makes it in unchanged. I expect Path of the Giants to be a solid role player in throwing builds, and also just for builds that want to get as large as possible. But I think that probably the most optimized throwing builds will still be using Berserker Barbarian, unless they have made significant changes to this subclass. Clerics are getting Death Domain Clerics, which is an offensively focused cleric that is built around doing damage with its cantrips and with its damage-dealing necromantic spells. Death Domain Clerics get a couple really awesome features, although one of them is actually going to probably just be available to every cleric, the Toll the Dead cantrip, which is one that's been missing in Baldur's Gate 3, but is a really key part of Cleric's kit in Tabletop, because it gives them a very powerful damage-dealing spell. Toll the Dead is your best damage-dealing spell in Tabletop as a cleric, and they've been missing it, which has made clerics not have a good damaging cantrip option. You've been using Produce Flame or Sacred Flame in order to deal damage, which are just significantly worse than Toll the Dead. And so having that added to clerics is going to change how they play out in the very early game significantly. Death Domain clerics are even better at this because when they use a necromancy cantrip, which Toll the Dead is, they can twin it for free, hitting 2 enemies that are within 5 feet of each other. So you're going to be doing a ton of damage with Toll the Dead. They also have a bunch of abilities that do not work at all in Baldur's Gate 3. There's like tabletop-focused abilities around preserving corpses and stuff. But there's also just a bunch of bonus damage. They will do extra damage, extra necrotic damage on their attacks, which will allow them to be sort of, again, a more damage-dealing focused cleric. And as mentioned here, they've added the homebrewed ability to explode nearby corpses, which is going to be funny and hilarious and very reminiscent of playing like the Diablo 2 Necromancer, I think. So I'm very excited for that one. I think this is a more damage-dealing focused cleric that isn't light cleric. is something that's been kind of missing from Baldur's Gate 3's Cleric options, so this will give you a more aggressive take on a Cleric, if that's what you're looking for. Druid is getting the Circle of the Stars, which is a really cool and unique Druid, and I think also very appropriate for Baldur's Gate 3, where every different Druid subclass changes the class dramatically. Circle of the Stars Druid plays out in yet another totally unique way, so I think it's going to add another completely different playstyle to Druids, which will be very cool. You can turn into one of 3 starry forms. It's sort of your version of Wild Shape, which let you act in your humanoid form, but also give you a bunch of benefits. When you're the Archer form, you get bonus action ranged attacks, so you can continuously cast damaging spells, but also add extra damage with bonus action ranged attacks. When you're in Chalice form, whenever you cast a spell, you heal a nearby ally, which is going to give you quite a lot of bonus healing, and Druids are already an excellent character for using the buff on healing items, so a Chalice form Circle of the Stars Druid is going to be probably one of the best at that very powerful strategy, because you just get a lot of free healing for doing something you already want to do, just casting spells. It says here that Dragon form allows you to deal damage with an added bonus to Constitution rolls, so I think they have house-ruled Dragon. In Tabletop, Dragon just makes you better at passing concentration checks, which is honestly moderately powerful but fairly boring. So it sounds like Larian have maybe done some things to spice that up, where you get a little bit of additional damage. You also, at level 6 in Tabletop, get basically cutting words. You can use your ability to increase or decrease enemy attack rolls, saving throws, skill checks, etc., which are which is obviously an extremely powerful effect. And so you will be able to use that as the Circle of the Stars Druid as well. So I think this is going to be an incredible control-focused Druid or damage-dealing-focused Druid, protecting your party with cutting words, buffing them with the Cosmic Omen buff. It's called Cosmic Omen, not Cutting Words, but it's basically the same as Inspiration or Cutting Words from Lorebard, with a couple different ways that it actually activates, but we'll see how it actually works in Baldur's Gate 3. But that is a hugely powerful effect to have on a spellcaster, as we know from Lorebard, and Circle of Star Druid gets that alongside the really excellent Druid combat options. So again, I expect this to be an extremely powerful subclass. Paladins are getting the Oath of the Crown, which honestly surprised me a little bit, because I thought that the Oath of Conquest was kind of a shoo-in. It's, I think, by far the most popular Paladin oath that isn't in Baldur's Gate 3 already. But the Oath of the Crown is, in my opinion, a better addition, because it does something that Baldur's Gate 3 really does not have. It is a true tanking class. The Oath of the Crown gets an area of effect taunt, causing enemies to be forced to attack you and unable to move away from you. And it gains the ability to take damage that an ally would take as a reaction. So this is Baldur's Gate 3's first actual true tank. Dungeons & Dragons mostly doesn't have tanks, but the Oath of the Crown is sort of the closest that we get, with the ability to cause enemies to be forced to attack you and unable to escape you, and to just take damage instead of allies. So this will give you a role that has previously been missing from Baldur's Gate, and is something that we can use in a lot of builds and party compositions, especially to keep weaker allies alive, so it'll let you have much squishier builds on your supporting or damage dealing classes if you incorporate an Oath of the Crown Paladin into your party, because then you will be guaranteed to be able to keep them alive with the tanking abilities that this character brings you. So I really like this pick, because it's going to add another whole dynamic to party building when Oath of the Crown Paladin is in. Fighters are getting the Arcane Archer, another extremely prevalent fan favorite, so really happy to see this one's in. I already did a build guide to trying to recreate this character in Baldur's Gate 3 using the special arrows, so you can check out my Arcane Archer build guide. Obviously, we're not using the subclass in that build guide because it didn't exist in Baldur's Gate yet, but I tried to recreate the feel of playing this character in that guide. The Arcane Archer imbues your arrows with magical effects. You can choose a bunch of different magical effects and do all kinds of cool things. One of the ones that it mentions here is banishing enemies, but you can also charm enemies. You can have the arrow explode. You can weaken enemies. There's all kinds of really cool effects. Now, it is true that in Baldur's Gate, a lot of the effects that Arcane Archers get are already included as special arrow ammunition. So I expect to see some homebrew effects, and probably fewer than the tabletop character gets, because you can just use an arrow of fire rather than imbuing your arrow with fire in Baldur's Gate 3. And I'm also really interested to see how this character interacts with the special arrows, in particular the arrow of many targets, which causes all sorts of weird things to happen in Baldur's Gate. But if you can imbue an arrow of many targets with Arcane Archer effects, that will no doubt be encounter winning all by itself. I expect there to be a lot of awesome interactions. I'm really interested to see how they implement this. I think this is one that will probably see a bunch of house rules because a lot of its features are already kind of baked into the game already. But I'm very excited for the Arcane Archer. As you know, I love archers, and so I'm looking forward to getting another tool to play with and make even more cool archer builds. Monks are getting the Drunken Master, which I think was originally supposed to be in Baldur's Gate before they decided to change it to the Shadow Monk, which I love Shadow Monks, so I'm certainly not sad about that, but I also really love seeing the Drunken Master in. There's so much alcohol in Baldur's Gate, it seems like a shame not to be able to use it, and there's a lot of items that care about drinking alcohol, so it'll be really fun to get a character that is centered around that. It does look like they've made significant house rule changes to the Drunken Master Monk here. A lot of the abilities that they mention here are not ones that exist in tabletop, but the way that the Drunken Master works in tabletop is you can disengage more easily, you can do all kinds of other things, but the Drunken Master in Baldur's Gate 3, I think, will be significantly different. So I'm not going to speculate too much on how it's going to work, but I will say it's just awesome that we are getting a character that was originally intended to be in the game. That I do like that they are house ruling the character to work with the way it works in Baldur's Gate 3, the way the game works in Baldur's Gate 3, and I'm excited to see what they do, as well as a great character to use some of the cool equipment in the game that doesn't see a lot of usage, the equipment that gets benefits when you're drunk. Rangers are getting the Swarmkeeper, which is another one it looks like they have done a significant upgrade pass on from the tabletop version. The Swarmkeeper in tabletop is a very cool subclass, but what they've done in tabletop is said it doesn't matter what the swarm of creatures is, they all have the same effect. In Baldur's Gate 3, instead, it looks like you are getting multiple different kinds of swarms that you can activate, which for different effects, which is very cool and kind of in line with what they've done with Beastmaster Ranger, which they heavily house ruled. I have said before that I think Beastmaster Ranger benefited a ton from what they did in Baldur's Gate 3 with it. It's a class that Wizards of the Coast in tabletop has never really had a good idea of what to do with Beastmaster Rangers, and Larian basically solved it by making Beastmaster Rangers awesome. So I'm really excited to see what they do with Swarmkeeper Ranger. In tabletop, it gives you the ability to do certain effects when you attack. You can teleport yourself, teleport an enemy, or deal extra damage. And it looks like they have added a few other effects to Swarmkeeper Ranger on top of those. It also gives you flight and bonus move speed and some defensive capabilities. So I expect to see some of those show up. But this is another one that it looks like Larian are house ruling significantly. So we will have to wait and see exactly how they implement it in Baldur's Gate to be able to make a determination of how powerful this class is going to be. But what I'm seeing here from this description is very promising to me, because honestly, this character in tabletop is fun and cool, but a little bit shallow. It doesn't have a ton of depth to different choices that it can make. Whereas in Baldur's Gate 3, it looks like we're getting a lot more depth to the character, while hopefully maintaining some of the power level and stuff that makes it cool. Swarmkeeper Ranger basically adds a lot of control effects to Ranger, and so being able to force move enemies into spike growth and stuff like that is going to be awesome. Adding a lot of control spells to your spell list as well is going to be really great. So this is going to be a more control-focused Ranger, probably, using mobility and forced movement in order to have a lot more agency on the battlefield, which is exactly the kind of character that I love, so I'm really excited to see this one. I know I've said that about all of them, but I think that they've made excellent choices of subclasses to put in from what I'm seeing so far. So, yeah, I'm just pretty happy about these. The Swarmkeeper Ranger, I think, is going to be really cool, and I'm excited to see what they do with it. The Swashbuckler Rogue is another fan favorite. In earlier editions of Dungeons & Dragons, the Swashbuckler was in fact its own whole base class, but it was rolled into Rogue in 5th edition as a subclass, and has always been an extremely popular one. Swashbuckler Rogue gets a couple things that are really cool. Firstly, whenever you hit an enemy, you can just run away from them and they can't opportunity attack you, so you don't even have to use your bonus action to disengage. You can just run away, use your bonus action to dash, so you will always be able to escape a retaliation from an enemy as long as you can land an attack on them, which makes for a really powerful hit-and-run character. Secondly, you add your charisma bonus to your initiative. We'll see if this makes it into the game unchanged, but any bonus to initiative in Baldur's Gate is obviously ridiculous because of the D4 initiative roll. So Swashbuckler Rogue getting a charisma bonus to initiative is awesome. This will make building your rogue as a party face a little less painful as well, because you'll be getting combat stats out of the charisma. Not painful, but it'll make it even more attractive than it already was, because you'll now be getting combat stats out of the charisma as well. And in addition to that, whenever you're one-on-one against an enemy, you can sneak attack them even if you don't have advantage. So you'll be able to do a lot of cool hit-and-run stuff where you run up to an enemy, sneak attack them, they won't be able to retaliate, and then you run away. Again, this is assuming that these abilities make it into the game unchanged, but it does sound like they've included at least fancy footwork totally unchanged. It also seems like they've added a couple more effects. Blinding enemies by throwing dirt and disarming enemies are not things that are available to the Swashbuckler Rogue. Excuse me, I just blanked on words there. By default, although those are things that any character can do in tabletop D&D. You sort of always have that option because it's just something that a person could physically do. So that's available in tabletop. So I think they are adding in that kind of effect to some characters in cool ways, and I'm excited to see a rogue with a disarm, because that is a very mobile character, and a disarm's a very powerful effect that's also very flavorful for rogue. Swashbuckler Rogue, I think this will be more of a character that is designed for fun. I also think it'll show up in a lot of solo builds because of the ability to do hit-and-run tactics. Because it probably won't do massive damage, it won't be as powerful as some of these other subclasses in terms of raw damage, but I also expect it to show up as a 3-level dip a lot, because charisma bonus to initiative is just that good, and you get the other rogue goodies as well. So just like Thief Rogue, I think this will show up in a lot of builds as a 3-level dip, and will also just be a really fun and powerful character to play. Sorcerers are getting the Shadow Magic Sorcerer subclass. Shadow Magic Sorcerers are darkness-focused sorcerers, and they're more defensively oriented than a lot of sorcerers, because they are centered around cloaking themselves in darkness to avoid retaliation, and they come with a pretty defensive subclass feature, which is mentioned here in Strength of the Grave. How this works in tabletop is once per day, when you're reduced to 0 hit points, you make a charisma saving throw, and if you pass it, you stay at 1 hit point. Meaning that you basically get a free pass on your first death in a given run, especially useful for sorcerers who will often be targeted down by enemies and come with low hit points. I will say that in Baldur's Gate 3, this kind of effect and the half-orc effect that does the same thing don't work very well, because a lot of enemies multi-attack or deal multiple damage instances and will just kill you anyways through this effect, so I wouldn't rely on it, but it is a nice bonus. They've also added the Hound of Ill Omen, which in tabletop is sort of a half summon. It's not a fully controllable summon. It just like runs at the enemy and attacks them. But in Baldur's Gate 3, I expect to be more of a fully featured summon, given that they've talked about how they've homebrewed it here. They also mention Shadow Walk, which in tabletop is a level 14 ability that you don't get until level 14. So it sounds like they've moved it earlier in the level progression, and that's basically the same as Shadow Monk's teleport, letting them move between areas of darkness. Obviously incredible for a sorcerer. I expect shadow magic sorcerers to be really powerful because of that ability primarily. Teleporting between areas of darkness and having just a ton of mobility for a sorcerer is incredible. Storm Sorcerer is kind of the default sorcerer because it gives you so much mobility, and Shadow Magic Sorcerer will have a ton. We'll have to see what the numbers are on Shadow Walk, but Shadow Walk is going to be the big winner here if you get it early enough, and if it's implemented with decent range and number of uses per day and stuff like that, then you'll be able to use that to increase your sorcerer mobility, and that'll make Shadow Magic Sorcerer an amazing default. Warlocks are getting Hexblade Warlock. Hexblade Warlock is a subclass people have wanted in the game for a very long time, and is the sort of normal melee Warlock build in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, in Baldur's Gate 3, the main feature that Hexblade Warlock gets has been rolled into the Pact of the Blade feature. In tabletop, Pact of the Blade doesn't let you attack using your charisma. That's a Hexblade Warlock's thing, whereas in Baldur's Gate 3, it does. So I'm not exactly sure what the main advantage they're going to give Hexblade Warlock is going to be, because its main feature is already a default thing that every Warlock can get in Baldur's Gate 3. You will get medium armor and martial weapon proficiency, which is going to be very useful, of course, to a melee Warlock. And as mentioned here, you're going to be able to turn enemies into spirits, which is a very cool ability. But they don't mention what the main level 1 ability for Hexblade Warlock is going to be, because the one that they have in tabletop is elsewhere in Baldur's Gate 3. So I expect to see a major ability that's been homebrewed in at level 1 for Hexblade Warlocks. I'm very interested to see what that'll be, but I do think that melee Warlock builds will still be using this because of the weapon proficiencies and the other melee-focused abilities that Hexblade Warlocks get. This is one I'm going to have to reserve judgment on until I see what they've done with it, because it's missing its main feature, or its main feature is already part of the game, rather. So we'll have to see what that main feature is when they actually implement it in BG3. Finally, wizards are getting the Bladesinger wizard, which is a melee-focused wizard subclass. It gets extra attack and has the ability to increase its armor class and movement speed, buffing your armor class by your intelligence bonus a few times per day, which is a pretty powerful increase to your armor class, especially in combination with the shield spell. This can make Bladesinger wizards very, very hard to actually hit. And if you then combine that with a character that gets other increases to its armor class, you can be really powerful. Now, in tabletop, this ability doesn't work if you're using any armor other than light armor or any shield, so you are giving up other things that give you armor class. But in Baldur's Gate 3, you can raise your AC already quite high with unarmored characters, with mage armor, of course, and with the bracers of defense and other things that increase your armor class. So the Bladesinger wizard will probably be able to get quite staggeringly high AC values. That means it will probably show up as a main character, as a main class, in multi-class builds, possibly with 2 levels of Paladin and 6 levels of Bladesinger wizard for extra attack, and also as a dip in other classes for 2 levels to just increase your armor class by your AC and give you, by your intelligence bonus, give you wizard spellcasting, which obviously a 1 level or 2 level wizard dip is already ridiculous in Baldur's Gate 3 because it gives you all the wizard spellcasting, and lets you learn any wizard spell from scrolls, no matter your levels. So I expect that this will see more play in multi-class builds than as a mono-class, but also a pretty powerful build. I will say a melee-focused wizard in BG3 is a little odd, because most characters that want to do melee-focused characters who are casting spells as well will be better off just taking one level of wizard and then taking levels in Sword Bard or Paladin or Spore Druid or some other character that gets more melee-focused abilities while also getting full spell casting. Because of how wizard spells from scrolls work in Baldur's Gate 3, you aren't actually required to take wizard levels. So it'll be interesting to see where the Bladesinger wizard fits. It is my opinion that this one will probably show up more as part of multi-classes, especially as like a 2-level dip. But depending on how they've implemented the abilities, it could end up being very, very powerful. So again, I'll be very interested to see how this character works when we actually get to play with it. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the upcoming subclasses in Baldur's Gate 3. Honestly, I'm not usually a fan of this type of video where somebody just reacts to an announcement that doesn't yet have any actual implemented content or anything to take a look at, but I wanted to do this one because I really felt like giving you some insight into how these characters work in tabletop could help give you some insight into what to expect for how they're implemented in Baldur's Gate 3, what kinds of builds are now going to be possible with these characters in the game, and what sort of things we can look forward to when these launch. It sounds like patch 8 is going to come out sometime early next year. I expect January or February. I would expect some delays as usual because these things often get delayed, but of course I'm really looking forward to it, and when these subclasses launch, we will absolutely be doing build guides to the subclasses and to various multi-class builds that are now possible with these new subclasses, so of course we can look forward to that. As always, if you have enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like, helps me out with the algorithm, so I do appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 analysis and other strategy game content. Cheers folks, I'll catch you next time.